Now, the US is planning to increase, quote, non-lethal assistance to groups fighting the Syrian government. The State Department says it's working with Congress to provide $70 million in new aid to anti-government groups in Syria. If Congress approves the new aid, it will bring to nearly $400 million the total amount Washington has funneled to anti-government groups since Syria was gripped by the armed conflict. The war enters its fifth year on March 15th. The UN says more than 200,000 Syrians have been killed, with millions more being displaced. Well, let's go to Washington and talk to Dr. Webster Tarpley, author and historian. Welcome to the program, sir. Dr. Tarpley, millions of dollars of non-lethal aid. Who is to verify these who is to verify that these aids are non-lethal, and why aid the opposition in the first place?
I think you're pointing to one of the many absurdities in this entire exercise between the United States and the alleged Free Syrian Army or some such group. Obviously, the money that is put in can be hijacked by the CIA and used for many different things, including lethal aid, terrorism, and so forth. But I think it's more important to perhaps note that the Free Syrian Army has virtually ceased to exist. It was always largely fictitious. But now the props, the extras that have been used to maintain that fiction, they seem to be disappearing. In other words, the general idea is that north of Damascus and north of Aleppo, there's virtually nothing left that calls itself the Free Syrian Army. It's essentially a struggle between ISIS, of course, or the Nusra Brigades, which means Al-Qaeda, or some other extremist and terrorist groups. So who's going to get this? The only place that the Free Syrian Army actually has some residual, vestigial existence is in the south, along the Jordanian border, where apparently Jordanian forces are doing everything to keep them going. So in terms of reality on the ground, I think this is absurd. Now, the other side of it, though, which I think is real and dangerous, is there is this relentless push here in Washington, which I view with alarm just about every day of the week. You've got the new head of the Pentagon, the new Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter, is in favor of interfering in Syria, right? Arming the rebels. You've also got, obviously, the eternal chorus of Senator McCain and Senator Graham, the universal all-purpose warmongers and madmen that we have here. You've also got the most important single figure, I think, is the ISIS czar, who is not well known. The international public opinion is not alerted to the presence of General John Allen, Marine Corps general, who has been at work now for about 6 months. We just had the unfortunate Mrs. Psaki of the State Department yesterday repeat the U.S. call that Assad has to be overthrown. One wonders apropos of what. So what I think is this constant pressure, it's a kind of a relentless bombardment of the Obama White House with these demands for aggressive action. One other that's worth mentioning, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Corker, Senator Corker of Tennessee, is obsessed with this idea that there's got to be a no-fly zone north of Aleppo, and that's got to be imposed then by a large air campaign to essentially cripple and destroy the Syrian Air Force and the Syrian air defense. So I think what we're seeing in the public sphere is essentially a kind of a window dressing that corresponds to the fact that there are still warmongers who have not given up on bombing Assad.
And the fact that we're entering the fifth year of the conflict in Syria, for how long do you think the West is going to prolong this war?
I think it could be easily ended, and that's the thing that people should focus on. If you tell Saudi Arabia and the other reactionary Gulf monarchies, including Qatar and so forth, if you give them a very stern warning, stop sending money to ISIS and Nusra and so forth, and not just the government, but also individuals, rich reactionaries who fund this stuff, that would be one thing. The other thing is Corker and company, seem to have this idea that you've got to propitiate Turkey. You've got to make concessions that they want. I think that's completely wrong. I think the word ought to be, if you want to stay in NATO and the Western Alliance, if that's really what you want, then close that border and close it fast. No money, no oil, no recruits, right? These so-called recruits that ISIS makes apparently supposedly can cross across, they can go across Turkey very easily. All of that would have to end. And you would also try to convince the Western media to stop glorifying ISIS, who are now defeated, right? They're being defeated in Tikrit, so that myth is now deflated.
All right, well, I'm sorry we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Dr. Webster Tarpley, author and historian from Washington. Thanks for your time there, sir.